So good to see you, Beth.
And you, when just in recent months, there's always the wish to see you or talk with you just in such friendship. But when all of this arose, I had a handful of people where the intimacy was just so marked, of such tenderness, and just being in God in the question and also in the trust.
Mm.
And so the intimacy of that with the two of you was so profound. And John and I've spoken of it, Glenn and I've spoken of it. And so I thought this last week, I just would love to talk with them and see how you are and just the nature of our lives, you know, at these moments and these points. Yeah.
You've also been so much in our hearts, and just feeling you there, and all of the body of prayer holding all that's unfolding.
Yes.
All of it, yes. And your children and our families and John's children and my brother's children and all of that. So I had an experience maybe, I don't know how many months ago now, last summer, maybe early autumn, that I'm 67, but I was aware, I'm like an elder. I don't mean an elder like with a capital E, esteemed. I meant like the position of me within humanity seemed to be calling to that nature. And I was aware that I didn't tend to think of people in that way till they were maybe 75, 80, 85. Although I tend to respect people deeply, it's a great joy, that respect for everything. But as one is able, you know, none of us are perfect. But I was aware that when I thought of various people in my childhood who'd been at this age, I was aware, and then my grandmother taught me this, or my great aunt or uncle personified this. And I was aware, I thought of them not as old, but they were teaching me as elders, even though they weren't that far marked in the decades of their lives. But I felt that there was a sobriety of purpose, and I was aware that something was before my own life and my experience of the human race that was requiring me to behave more as a grandmother than a woman of later middle age. And I didn't propose to understand it. I simply knew I had to prepare a kind of muscle of the human being in myself. And so I just prepared myself from about August forward. And I noted just slightly different patterns in how I would move or allow a little more help to be given to me rather than try to carry the grocery bag. I might let the young man at the store carry it for me. And it was just a slightly different pattern of moving and turning through my breathing and my embodiment of a purpose as a human being. And then I found that when this particular winter came forward with the virus moving through humanity, I spoke with John, who's been a physician for 42 years and is at his office right now. And he thinks I had a very early case of it. I came back from work I had been doing in parts of Europe. And so I was very sick right at the very end of the holidays. But I was aware that I could feel the illness occurring in Asia as it kind of erupted or arose. And I would talk to him about that. He's used to me talking as a mystic, where I will tell him I'm perceiving something, and then, you know, we'll watch and see what is going on in the world, where those winds of God are moving through us, and how are we all to be with it. So there was in our household a quality of receiving the question, what is God bringing forward to the human being? And it entered the very center of our home because I almost died. And I watched a man who has not missed a day of work, whom you know and love. He has not missed a day of work in 42 years due to illness. And my breathing would be so ravaged that I was aware of the strength of my Father's purpose in me. And I would say to John and Blaine, this illness kills people. It doesn't just kill them, it tries to kill the organs. And so I'm having to hold my lungs or my kidneys or my various organs through my whole body with an effort of my will in God to breathe and to be in his will and his ways and grace, and my breathing would be like, and I've sat with many dying people, and that's not disturbing to me. However, I was aware that there was something I was to live through. The surrender was to live through it and to be with the breath embodied through the disease not being greater than the purpose God has for oneself. And so I think for anyone who has this, it is very deep experience. Some people don't have any symptoms. Some people have mild symptoms or very great. Mine were very severe. I would not even be able to sit up. I would be in so much pain in the lower lobes of my lungs. It attacked many of the parts of my lungs that I've seen in CT scans and pictures. I go, that's exactly where it was in me. And so no matter what level someone goes through this, the nature of the grace of an incarnation has its own fulfillment. Mm-hmm. And I think one should never be afraid to embody that fulfillment. And I would be a living proof of that, because I have a damaged heart, I have congestive heart failure, and, I'm fine, but I'm not like the pinnacle of health. So I'm exactly the person who's at the highest risk, mm-hmm. exactly the person who would be the most like to die, or the one that they would try to use the ventilator for the younger person and not me. And so I think that the mercy of God is, to me, what's at hand here. And I mean that on the deepest purpose. Something is happening in the human race, which is like a question has been posed to us when we thought that the competition for devouring the earth was what we were doing. And it's almost like God cleared his throat and he acknowledged, excuse me, but I'm here. And we went, wait, who are you? What are you? Where are you? I am he, I am she, I am that. I am that great mystery. I am everywhere. I am that which is in the firmament of all things. And then how shall we embody that? So I think that's just where we are. So the gratitude, I talked with Mahmoud sometime right after I had recovered, and he asked, how are you? And I said, well, I just am amazed that the compassion, what arose from me was this incomprehensible compassion. Mm-hmm. I would think, wow, what does the 90-year-old woman do who literally cannot call her grandson to please go and get the groceries for her? So not only is he not aware of it and not paying attention to what his maybe father or mother taught him, the intersection of the meeting is not greater than his competition to go someplace that he saw his friends go to on his phone. So it's like calling to an attention of embodied mercy. And in that, I think some conversation among the human beings is occurring that is very, very true. And I taught something recently where I used concepts from Confucianism and Taoism. And one of the qualities I love in Confucianism is the idea of the virtues. There are 5 main virtues. One is to embody. And the first one is that one is to have gravitas, gravity, being with reality in all things. Not heaviness, but the reality. And in Hinduism, the prayer is from the unreal lead me to the real. But you begin the 5 excellent virtues with being present in the reality, and then embodying mercy and sort of kind of a courageous practice of actually living the virtues, and just beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautifully said, Beth. As you say that, what is God bringing forth in us, and how has the conversation been shifted?
Yeah.
Everybody's conversation has been shifted in different ways. And
Yeah.
you're suddenly aware of a dimension that we might have not given as much awareness to. And we're beginning to look with sincerity at our lives in a new way and to connect with each other, just as it's brought us together today. And the mercy
And
of
some people can't wait till it gets over. They're like, and when will it be over so I can just go back to
normal. Go back to normal.
We clear our throats.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
God hasn't finished clearing his throat yet. So.
Yes. Normal may be different.
Yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Just
No.
yeah.
No, you say it well, and you had to experience it for all of us. For a portion of humanity, you had to live it and know it.
Kabir, there's an idea that some people believe in reincarnation and some people don't. My own experience would be that it has occurred, and I remember aspects of my own history. And one of the things in my last life I was well known for is I went through a series of illnesses. And I know there are other people who do this. In Catholicism, it's called an intercessionary body of work a human being does. It's like a farmer tilling a field, from pulling out the field stones and digging with the old plow horse or their old plow with their own body. They dig the field and they plant the seeds, and so you're part of you're an ordinary human being, and yet there's this river of something like the rain following the seeds and filling the little trough in the field, and then you go, gee, it's growing, and there's a stream running down below the field, and you're just the farmer who's tending the field. You get to be with what God is doing in all of it. However, you have to be the one who's willing to clear the field and plant the seeds. And so there are stories about many people, Therese Newman in Germany in the mid 20th century, or the sweet mother of Pondicherry, Mira, who was a French woman who was Sri Aurobindo's spiritual companion, who lived in southern India most of her life, or most of her mature life, had trips to Japan. She was very connected to Japan and France. And France was the country of her birth, but they would go through particular illnesses, and they would philosophically embody being a maternal or matriarchal thread of that seed. And so when I became so ill, I don't really like to talk about these things about oneself, but when I went through this, I was aware of what I was going through. It was just me. But I was aware that there's a beautiful quote from Krishnamurti, whom I never met when he was alive in his last life, but he gave a talk in Ojai in his last years, and he very famously looked out at the crowd. He would teach in this beautiful grove of olive trees there every year, and he said, each one of us is all of mankind. And then he put his head down and looked over at some of the trees, and then he turned back and he said it again. Each one of us is all of mankind. And the crowd was quiet, and some people were talking quietly, and then he said it again. And I remember this was 1984. I was house sitting for a very beloved friend of mine and his wife, and taking care of their cat. And I almost never watched television at that time. I came back from the college where I was teaching in Seattle, Washington, and I came in and I just thought, I have to turn the television on right now. And I turned it on, and there he was. And there it was for 4 minutes, and it was the end of the talk, and I thought, this is true. And I turned the television off. And so in that nature, the thread of what I went through, and the presence of John, a physician beside me, my companion, and also an extremely old-fashioned and contemporary physician. The old style, get back into nature. The new style, well, let's see what medicines would help should it come to that. They didn't know at that time. And so And then Blaine, who's worked with me for 35 years. So the two men would listen to my breathing and watch me move through the day when I could barely sit up. And I would tell them what the suffering was like, what I could and could not do, and how weak I was. And then, of course, the compassion there was. But the most remarkable thing was the relationship of the two men to me, who was dying but did not. Like the tending of the human beings in this, in such mysterious care, trusting that however God would lead us through this, they were both prepared to bear what would happen if I did not live. That was spoken about and also unspoken between them. It was spoken about by me to both of them, to each of them, and to both of them together. But the unspoken mystery, so in what happens historically at a time like this, as I contemplated the younger generation, is we usually have a war. And we send the young people to fight the war. And the old people tell them what to do and kind of run the home front. But we send younger people whose bodies are very alive to go and use that life force for a future about one side or another side. In my illness, I had two men whom I absolutely adore, whom you both know and love, taking care of me beyond any weapons that have ever existed. So Y chromosome to Y chromosome in the two men, what was God doing among us? Mm-hmm. And what do we impart to our children if we don't have to send them to war? See, we've never done that before. The human race has never done it before. So as a mystic, and I'll use that word because as a scientist, as an author, as a mother, as a father, in all the different roles each of you have, or John has, or Blaine has, or any man or woman has, well, what is to happen beyond the study of arguments? There's a beautiful phrase, and he will study, or she will study, or they will study war no more. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So what happens when we don't? Who are we? We just never knew that yet adequately. And I feel that in us as such great friends and colleagues, we are practicing that. You know, that's in all that I know of the two of you and your family, your children and your grandchildren, your children's spouses, your friendships. So there's something, it's in your practices of zikr, you know, how you pray, how you move as a dervish, as a sheikh, as Camille Anna, you know, Kabir Dede, like you're the people who you are by birth, Edmund, Camille, your parents, your late parents, your siblings. It's like every role each of you moves through, or John or Blaine or I move through, beyond war, then someone goes, really? Is it true? And we could say, it's always been true. We simply did not know this yet among us, we human beings. So from the illness I underwent, what I would understand is, oh, well then, what a shore of the ocean of God we stand at. Mm-hmm. Is it not awesome?
Yes, truly.
Only filled with his names everywhere. Mm-hmm. How shall we speak them? How shall we teach them to our children? Yes. And then when they see us embody this, something in them, I feel, will know what to do. Mm-hmm. The transmission, there are all the beautiful stories of transmission from the Buddha to his 6 proteges and from Jesus to his different apostles and disciples and women. And something happens that is called to real existence. And we study those stories, but we often study the tragedies which didn't allow them to be fulfilled, rather than studying the fruits of the field of the farmer, you know, at the garden. And so, I mean, we're speaking now, it's Holy Week. Today is Passover, first day of Passover. Mm-hmm. and we're just in the middle of Holy Week. So, what is happening here? And it's very ecstatic, yet it's so still. It's like the ecstasy and the stillness of eternity are expressing themselves as one. And I go, wow, I've only ever known that in like the name of Jesus or Elijah or, Ramakrishna or Rumi or Shams. It's like it's there and it's evident and it's available. Not just to the two of you or me, it's available to everyone, all over the earth. And so I feel as if what happened is we had a classroom and we sort of have an F- in it for collaborative, civilization. And the teacher just said, that's it, And we had in fifth grade, I had a wonderful teacher, Mrs. Foreman, and we had this one boy who I loved. His first name was Paul. And he would just cause disturbance in the classroom. He was a great jester and he would have the best time doing it. He was sort of brilliant. And he finally had the principal of the school, Sister Irma, so disturbed one day that she just didn't know what to do with him. And if she put him in the hall, he thought it was fun. If she made him come outside with her, it was fun. She sent him home, it was fun because his mother was upset. So she just did not know what to do with him. So I feel that that's the level we reached as a human race, the plastic in the oceans. As I said to one young person, well, when we come out of this, you might just take one trip to another country in your whole life, not 400. And their mouth fell open. It wasn't what they had planned in their mental projections of everything. And they didn't know what they did or didn't want to do. They had no idea of what to do with the reality. They were used to Paul's spitballs flying all over their world, So from the place of where we have succeeded, but where we also have not taken care of this garden of the earth and of one another, I feel as if God went, okay, you have an F-, but I, who am the creator, am going to express myself enough to you that you can all do this together. It's like this absolutely merciful teacher, parent, who is unconditionally so fully present that it is just permeating the human race. And so it's a very distinct experience that every human being knows. So the lack of chaos out there is really a wonder. There's not chaos anywhere.
And the bringing within for everyone to taste of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That you could think, who could say this or who could create this? It's not.
Gives to rise in surprising forms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've seen it. The communications from a spectrum of people, from the mystics on the one hand to the everyday, ordinary, people, to the more corporately compelled type people. They're all getting the same lesson. They're all saying the same thing, basically, that they're experiencing the possibility of patience, the possibility of stillness, and the questioning about what was I doing before all this.
For people who've never had simplicity in their lives, I think this must be somewhat confusing. And I know when I lived in the Alaskan bush for 5 summers, I would be without running water or sometimes without electricity. And the nature of living remotely was very comfortable. But it took some of the people who worked with me time because they were so stunned at being away from all the comforts of life. So I've heard from a number of people where they don't quite know what to do, not having a sophisticated life. It's like a person who's afraid that there might be a bear in the woods, or, what if a lion comes to the door? And so I could say, well, the Lion of Judea is at the door. He's not going to harm you, however. And they're like, they don't know quite what to do because they're not really afraid, but they're afraid of all that they don't know because they have such inadequate practice for being with that. You know, so for people who don't have a lot of prayerful or meditative practice or practice with being with, whether it's spiritual principles or philosophical principles or just virtuous principles, there's a great deal of compassion for that because they don't know, they don't quite know how to handle the dissonance for them of the lack of stimulus constantly around them, you know. Yeah. And then, you know, scientifically, John sent me an article the other day that the earth itself is vibrating much less.
Mm.
The quietness has seismologists all over the world able to measure things in a completely different way because there are not all the jets taking off and landing and all the manufacturing and the cars and trucks on the roads, and just the actual earth itself apparently vibrates differently because of how we live on it, particularly in our huge cities.
Mm-hmm.
So a great deal of the static and the addiction people have to keeping busy and so many things going on is partly that they're engulfed in that ongoing stream of all of that agitation, I guess. So to be without that is such a different experience for a lot of younger people. Reminds me of what it was like when all of us would have been children. The mood that was present in the 1950s, 60s of a much quieter domain of the way life was, the way the mind was, or the personality presented itself, you know.
It feels very evident here with the trees, as though they're meditating, and the space for that is possible with the quieter space of human beings, you know. And even though there are a number of people in the park near here that, you know, beautiful Cherokee Park, people are so appreciating it and being very respectful of each other within that space. And the way that nature is holding all of this, and that it's spring, is such an amazing grace.
Well, in your spring there, where you have dogwoods and azaleas and camellias and all kinds of things, just
so many gifts that are just so freely given by all of nature, and all the blossoms.
I went in to take a shower earlier this afternoon, and I thought, gee, is there anything I thought we should bring up today? And when we talked, and I thought of the trees and the senses of nature and the idea of how old some of the trees on the earth are.
Yes.
And that wondering how to be with an era like this. Someone could contemplate a sequoia that might be 1,000 years old. And the sequoia have no enemies. They have no insects which kill them and no animals which devour them. Their seeds are propagated, I think, once a fire passes through it. Requires a certain heat for it to be stimulated to then, you know, seed and kind of fertily take root and present another tree. So what they have watched over these hundreds and thousands of years, and the steadfast lack of enmity from anything in the universe toward them, would give us a capacity of being children of that somehow, you know, and just might give people who have fear or conflict or confusion about what to be as a human being, that would give them a respite and a place of refuge and blessing and inspiration. Yeah.
And Beth, you know, since the illness is an illness of the breath, of the lungs, and people are suffering constriction of the lungs, and I just wonder if this suggests something, some practice of breath. Can we breathe for those who can't? Can we the human race breathe in a new way? Can there be a new awareness of the possibilities of breath?
Mm-hmm. That's part of why I talked about having had it, is I thought I've studied parts of meditation for about 50 years. And so for me, the breath being very still and at ease is very natural in pretty much every circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
And as I stayed with that, I was aware that the virus itself was attacking like the human life and trying to kill it, like not living symbiotically with it. But most illnesses, when you get them, if you have and the coronavirus is like, the cold is a coronavirus. I think the flu, I think influenza may be a coronavirus, but I'm not sure. But the common cold definitely is. So there are several of them the human body is accustomed to. So the cold comes and we think, oh, I have this creature living in me, and yet I'm living, and it's uncomfortable for me, and it's a bad cold or a little cold, or it's my grandmother who's 90, it's a difficult cold. And so we tend it, but the cold is not harming her. It's not harming us. There's some symbiosis of consciousness we've learned to be accustomed to in relationship to the illness. And so the experience of this is that there was no willing relationship. The virus did not will for one to live.
Mm.
It was a part of what would will one to die. Not me to die, just will a human being to die. And I was aware, I don't know how I would say this, I was aware that humanity had reached a point where much of nature did not will for us to live if we did not live in an adequate symbiosis with it.
So,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry that, it's a very honest, objective description of what you experienced, and it's remarkable to hear you say that. And I can't help but note that the United States has 400 bioweapons facilities around the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a simple fact.
Mm-hmm. So, and then of course, as John said, that's just stupid. Why would we fight with biology? It's just stupid. Like, as a scientist and a doctor, his view, like, why would anyone do that?
Yeah.
And I know when I lived in Alaska, I was tested sometime later for, I don't know what, just a regular physical. And you have your normal blood work done, and whatever they did of my blood panel, the doctor said, wow, you've been exposed to anthrax. Where would that have happened? I said, oh, I could have been travels. And he said, wait a minute, you lived in Alaska. You weren't up in these areas, were you? And I said, oh yeah, I supervised pregnancy explosions. And he said, oh, there was a sparring between Russia and the United States where anthrax was used as a bioweapon by the Russians toward America up in these very remote regions of the Brooks Range. And there were some groups from the armed forces who went up to study some of the villagers, and the man said, you must have been one of the people who was exposed to that. And so,
Yeah.
it was just, so it shows in my blueprint of what I've been exposed to in my body. And so with John was saying, it'd be interesting if I took a test now, would it show now that I'd had it, or does it stay in the blood where they can test the COVID or not, in the time after? And then they're worried whether people can get it back again. Can they get it back? And if they do, is it much less strong, or is it stronger? Like in the flu epidemic of 1918, it swept through and it was very mild, and then it swept through the next year and it was extremely virulent. So if people feel a great deal of concern in the scientific community that they're not speaking about, that's part of what they're looking at, is they're very worried, what if it comes back again in a larger, more virulent swath and takes a larger proportion of the human race? So they're trying so deeply to find a vaccine or some kind of a remedy, particularly treating one with almost a natural, not so much an external vaccine, but something that could arise from within the nature of the human body, So it's like a whole study of everything it is to be a human being. How do we answer this by organically awakening rather than attacking anything or anyone from any direction? And so we're not used to really being willing to be without fighting. We usually choose a different direction where one's ego or one's tribe or one's sort of nature of philosophy wins. And so, I mean, it could be a Buddhist friend thinking they are a greater intellect than a Roman Catholic friend, or the Roman Catholic friends thinking they're greater because Jesus is close to them and that the Buddha was just enlightened mentally, you know, how come, well, it was more than that. Like, but there are these ideas like people are dueling with philosophical constructs and projections of who gets to possess life or longevity or the fruits of the earth.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so, you know, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this, as you mentioned, you know, now it's the beginning of Passover, and then we have Easter coming very soon, and then the beginning of Ramadan. So it's this special holy time for the whole Abrahamic family. And, you know, beyond, you know, there are always these remembrances within the family of spirit, and that we can hold, God willing, that oneness, you know, and the response to all that's been arising in this time of deepening spirit. Perhaps some new ways of being together, you know, can emerge.
So if you take that, Camille, and you bring in all the threads you so beautifully weave from the past, if we bring into that Abraham and Moses and Jesus and Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, what would come from them and through us now and into what is coming that would allow us to remember and be and become of that. So I think that you're speaking right to the heart of what one's life is about now. And and then we're answered by God in becoming the vessel of that. Not so much an answer, or we become like a cup, you know, and there is in Judaism the Kaddish cup, and there is the chalice in Christianity, or the Grail. There's also the concept of the Grail, and the idea of, I would say, the hospitality in Islam of welcoming the guest. And can I make you tea? Would you like tea? You come in, and in the emptiness of the cup, trust is in the way in which we share the fulfillment God's faith will answer, in that it will not fail. So I feel as if we're not quite pregnant with, isn't quite the word, but we are representing this. And so we're in a state of wonder about it. Because much of our sophisticated identity thinks it can't possibly be real. I'm not speaking for myself, because I would have the temperament where I can perceive the reality of it. I don't mean perfectly, but I'm a student of that reality. And I know people who think, well, I can't do that. That wouldn't be sophisticated or smart. What am I going to do about something in 6 months? You know, I go, you'll have to see. Well, but I want to plan to go see my daughter. And I go, well, I guess you'll have to see. It's like they can't be in control of God's mystery.
Yes.
They are the child of God's mystery. So what you're saying is exactly, if we would do this side by side, you know, if you go into the mosque, you simply come in side by side. So if all across the planet we come in, whatever faith we are engaged in or not engaged in, but the human race comes in side by side and we practice this, then we begin to be answered according to on earth as it is in heaven, not on earth as it is in our tantrum. And so the transformation of that is really truly the mystery. It's just extraordinary. And it's not difficult. It's very childlike, really, you know, and yet for us, we are embodying this as people who are not ancient, but we have this elder quality of, I think, purpose, representing as a role model, in humility as well as anything we understand, and in need as well, because as I said, the young person has to help carry the groceries, not just, oh my goodness, look at Camille or Kabir or Beth, they could just carry the groceries. Like, well, no, not really. We can and can't. It implies the we, not I.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, we're able to help be a living model of calling people to that. Yeah.
For some people, this is a clear reminder of our dependence on God. For other people for whom God is not in the picture so much, and in fact may be entirely denied, the upsetting of egoistic human expectations is a divine manifestation. The suddenly people are finding out that something has happened. There's a shock has come into their lives, and all of the ordinary, conventional, habitual human expectations, desires, and ambitions are suddenly unexpectedly thwarted. And they have to deal with that somehow. They have to deal with that reality. And if it becomes merely an aggravation to the ego, that's one thing. That's one way to greet it or experience it. But if it breaks through those human expectations and habits, something has broken through. A divine manifestation has broken through, whether they know it or call it that or not. So that's also the mercy, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I think that we may have had some kind of plan where, how you have 3 children, so your children might have had a certain plan for a birthday or a holiday, and it's a different plan than the parents had or the grandparents had. But I think that many human beings had all these plans for what they thought humanity was going to do for the next 20 years that maybe the planet couldn't quite bear. Mm-hmm. So something in nature is collaborating to show us not that way, this way. Mm-hmm. So, another direction would be from some of the tribal purposes. A disease would be considered almost like a creature. And so you'd say, what does the bat represent? Or what does the animal through which it has passed to the human being, what does that represent in sort of sacred totemic ideas, from Jungian therapy to different tribal ideas? And so your medicine, like a deep medicine man, Credo Mutwa just died recently. He was this great High Sanusi of the Zulu people of Southern Africa, this amazing human being. And I can't speak for Credo, but someone like him would look at a disease and work with trying to get it to go back into itself or resolve itself in a balanced way back into God. And that it would have served a certain purpose of why it was moving through a person or a village or a culture. And so one of the things I did in being so sick was I asked the virus, please don't hurt anyone. Please only allow people to live as best and move through things and try to transform yourself into something which is not harmful. And of course, as a human being, I could only do that if I were trying to do the same thing myself, right? Mm. So in that, you then have a meeting with, rather than going, oh, there's an illness out there, or there's me and I'm important, or that illness is frightening, what is it going to do to my brother or my parent? We we have a quality where we are moving through it, allowing it to be of God or of the universe. If it's an atheist or a person who's agnostic, or holding a very strong mental viewpoint that there is not God, I go, well, whatever you want to call the vastness of it, it still is in existence. And how shall you be in conversation with that, so that we are able to have resolution? And then one's breath becomes very still. It's because it's undisturbed, right? So what I found is when I started being with that so deeply, I was undisturbed by the disease, because I was trying in my heart of hearts to help everything in the universe, every human being, every animal, every plant. And Camilla, as you spoke of the trees, one of the things I was amazed, oh, the trees are like, they're just right there.
Mm-hmm.
How could we, I mean, I usually pay attention, but I was aware, how did I not know that like they were even more there than the human beings at all are there? It was just astonishing. Like they'd been waiting for us forever.
Yes, truly.
No.
Yes. And the water, just as
Mm-hmm.
much as people may not experience the total reality of God's grace, the fact of water and the capacity to clean, and even of fire, that it burns, but even in that burning can heal. That sense of the elemental world being there to support us through this.
Yes, yes.
And the trees and their deep wisdom and strength, just so steadfast, as you say, just witnessing and present. And yeah, so many graces.
Is there a name of, you will work with different prayers, of course, and things. Is there a name of God that you call on if you talk of the various attributes that you would turn to in the strongest way? Like, I've heard different people speaking of various prayers they've turned to, or concepts, or and many times people are private about this. So like with me, I took a very small icon. I've had many beautiful icons over the years. I've tended to give most of them away to people over the years, but I have a very tiny one that's not. It's just a copy, but of the prophet Elijah, and I put it on my little nightstand the other night, and I was aware, well, we're in the middle of something so truly prophetic in whatever God is doing. I called on that patriarchal place of guidance beside the human race.
Yeah. I a couple of weeks ago, I suggested two names that were beyond the obvious names like compassion and mercy and patience. And those two names were, first of all, Qayyum, it's Qayyum, which is the self-subsistent. And it's like an axis that runs through all levels of reality. And if we can connect to that in the midst of these challenges, we are connected to the highest reality, to the transcendent, and we bring that into this world with a steadfastness and purity in a way that is really needed. And the other is as-samad, S-A-M-A-D, and that's thought to be the attribute of God where God has no needs and yet is the satisfier of all needs. So the one that we turn to, who is absolutely needless, but who calls us, invites us, tell me what your need is that I might have the pleasure of satisfying that need. So it's a very transcendent concept. And I think for many people, it's often a very abstract notion, the one who has no needs, but is the satisfier of all needs, that relates it to our situation. And we turn everywhere, we turn in so many directions to try to satisfy our need, but ultimately it's only by turning in the direction of God that our needs, our true needs, are truly satisfied. So as-Samad and al-Qayyum were two names that came to me, very transcendent needs. And I said, this is the very strong medicine for this time. Yes, we need Rahman and we need Rahim, compassion and mercy, and we need salam, peace, and we need sabr, patience, and we need generosity, kareem. We need all these things. I mean, we know that. These are on the human level quite obvious, but there's a possibility in these extraordinary times to connect in an extraordinary way to the transcendent in order to bring that transcendent right to where we are right now.
Years ago, in 1979, I was doing some work over in Asia. It's the first time I really was overseas with pieces of work, and I was briefly in Calcutta, India, and staying at the YMCA there, which was sort of a place where women would come in and kind of be staying on their own and very safely. I came out of the doors, this beautiful building, and I came out of the doors one day, and there was a woman in front of the door in the gutter dying. And it's a busy city even at that time, so people were walking back and forth going to business, work, and things. And I saw her, and I came up to her, and I tried getting people to come and help me, and no one would stop. I was used to different cities of the world, and beginning with New York City, but I couldn't believe no one would stop. And she had maggots in the wounds on her legs and arms, and she was obviously dying. And she was probably 60 years old, slender but not emaciated. And I told her I'll be right back. And I don't even know if she spoke English. She couldn't talk, but she was too weak to talk. But I went back in and I asked one of the people in there to help me. And they said, well, no, they'll just die today. And then someone will come and get the body after dark. And I said, isn't there anyone? There must be someone who could help her. And I was aware that this happens all over the world all the time in various ways, but this happened right in front of me, right in my path that day. And I was aware you are to tend, that you are to help in any way you can with this. And the people said, no, there's no one who will help. And then they said, no, maybe Mother Teresa's people. Until they existed, no one helped in these circumstances. But since they've been here, they will come and take her and take care of her until she dies. And years later, 2000, I took a group of people through some parts of India and Nepal and Tibet, and we doing support work in the Tibetan plateau that the Chinese and Tibetans were having a lot of argument about. But I could bring some people in, and we could kind of come through and help some of the younger monks and nuns in the region, which was a very beautiful experience. And for everyone, the Chinese and the Tibetans and the Nepalis and the East Indians, and ourselves. And we went and we worked at Mother Teresa's house for the dying for a day. I asked people, I said, I'd like to do this, and you could do something else on that last day, but this is what I'm going to do. So people came with me, but coming into that world, it is a very, in the names of God you're calling forward, Kabir, there is so little when a baby is safely born and placed with his or her mother and God willing father. There is so little that is needed from anything else. And when one is dying, there is so little that's needed beside very fundamental care of the breath and the body and the comfort and gentility of the person and those who are with him or her. And so that work, I have done a lot of that work on both this birth and the death aspects. And so most people don't realize that life itself is like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that like the hollow reed of just the being breathing is so eminently beautiful in grace when it embodies in the moment the universe in that simplicity of that, the names of God you're stating. But we see it so rarely. You know, we sort of clothe ourselves like that old story of the emperors with no clothes, you know, and he's got all the bravado, but people realize he wasn't wearing anything. He's just walking through the streets. And so I find myself with that nature, you know, that being present as we go forward, that there's something we're being called to that's just that fundamental sense. So I'll work with someone who'll say, you know, my mother's dying and she's whatever age, and I want them to do all these treatments. And I'll say, she's this age now, her body's going through this. It might give her 3 more months, but she'll be suffering more. Do you want that? Does she want that? And they're like, how do I give her her life? And I'll go, well, what is God doing here with her and with you? And often we go, I don't want to know. I just don't want to know. But we really do want to know. We're just we're just somehow afraid of what that will look like or feel like or be. And when you're in the middle of it at that radical level where someone has been unafraid to be fully with it, it is such a comfort. You know, the birth or the death, the midwifing, the hospice care. You know, it could be the perfumed cloth of lavender water, rose water on a cloth on someone's forehead. And an hour later, they quietly take their last breath. And 10 years later, their wife says, I remember the smell of roses and how much I loved him. And, you know, and I mean, it's just that perfect. And so if every moment we could be with the perfume of his holiness and the roses, you know, of our breath, I go, then it's not hard. It's not hard. And so I feel that so much is what's before us. I do. Right. And so that part of God's fidelity to his universe is moving into such a perfume of holiness now that the attar of roses and birds is everywhere on the earth, you know. And then as we go to being elders, I go, oh, very good. And then if someone goes, well, Beth, what will she or he do? I go, we'll have to see. We'll have to become an adequate civilization that it might be revealed to us, that we might have another book from that being this time, like we do from before. See, if we're not able to achieve that, I would think God would keep them present yet hidden from us to not allow them to be affected by our arguments, you know. So I've been with people where someone will see a rainbow and someone else will turn and go, what was that? And they'll miss it, you know, because they were just not able to have that shown to them. I mean, this happens to all of us. None of us are perfect, and certain things are for each being's portion. But there are some things that are for all human beings. And I find that is happening among these children in the world. And so I think it behooves us as ordinary human beings and yet as Holy Family to receive what it is God is conceiving and gesting and birthing in the trees, in the people, in the plants, in the animals, in the elements. And then that we caretake creation adequately, that the climate and the elements and the animals and plants are willing to allow us to be here with them. And then the breath of everything becomes like Holy Spirit. It is all willing because God willing, we have, you know, become like his children in that way adequately.
And recognized again.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
beautiful
Mm.
to hear your description of this and of these souls who, of course, in their historical form, we know and have studied. And for us, I guess we've always known that they represent a kind of integration. Integration is a really key quality of the spirituality that they embodied, and the holiness that they embodied. And that holiness is something that, as I've sometimes, I mean, holiness is a quality that anyone recognizes wherever we find it, and we find it in all traditions. But it's been a bit obscured in the contemporary West by other notions of spirituality that have to do with, you know, relief from tension and empowerment, and these kind of cliches of the new age, and the kind of monetized spirituality that has spread a lot in America. But this quality of both integration and real holiness is something the world must be hungering for. And as you describe it, the fact that a wave of this is breaking upon our shores is very beautiful.
Yeah, a year or two ago, I said to Blaine, that's all I'm really interested in studying is holiness. I go, there's not that there's nothing else worth studying, but I go, that's really all that there is to study.
Yeah.
And that the holiness is something, is so much of God, that God's holiness is evident or present. The person is merging with that, or the situation is merging with that. I go, that was just all the attention was to that. It was just to that, and the joy and meaning that it brings, to allow that. And I think that so much of the sophisticated mind, so many people are very deeply educated now, or count their lives as sophisticated patterns of experience. And then that can rise up and think, well, that can't be real. And I go, shh, your mind is not able to find that. Let's be the students of that holiness. And then they go, what is that could be worth studying? And Camille, what are they doing? What are they and Beth talking about? I go, it's everything. And then they're like, well, how do I get that? I go, well, we're sort of in the middle of a classroom of that right now.